So where we left off was we were finishing up both the role of interest groups in society and explaining how they get formed and so forth. And the questions were in that first part is whether pluralism is really a democratic theory of politics. Is it an appropriate expression of democracy? And what I had described was you could look at it in two ways. First, if you remember, the argument was that different groups have different preferences, different goals, different things they're trying to achieve, and that when factions of interests form, other factions will also form to counter them, and there'll be a competition of different groups, and that competition of groups will strive against each other, and the result will be compromise, and the result will be moderation. And that the whole idea is that in essence, like an invisible hand will enable the different interests to produce the best results for society. And so, on the one hand, you could argue that sounds like a good democratic theory. It's representing the preferences of the public by having them negotiate with each other to produce the outcomes people care about. All groups are able to organize, and those with more energy, more people, more money, those where there's more of a commitment to the issue will have more influence, and their concerns will be expressed. That's the one hand. On the other hand, some individuals, wealthy individuals, some groups, oil companies, let's say, or business executives will have more influence because they have more money, because they have more power. And so in the system, they'll get an advantage. So that was the argument associated with pluralism. But the thing I wanted to add in is that the government does also have a role. It's not really in this country a question of whether we want it or we don't want it, pluralism. Because the alternative to some sort of pluralism is just to oppress groups from forming that you don't like, just to say that they can't advocate for their views. What government does to make it a bit more even is they try different things to make it a level playing field. So the first thing that they do is try and get that it is transparent, that you know who's involved, that it's not that one group, and mind you, this only partially works, but that let's say some wealthy groups fund others as puppets, in essence. So if it is let's say windmill operators, for example, are contributing massively to the Sierra Club or groups that are opposing oil. It has to be, so this is big windmill, that it would have to be publicly disclosed who's doing that. The other thing that this slide is talking about is that if you send a comment or you advocate for something in the federal government, if you seek to lobby and talk to government officials, that has to be reported. Any meetings have to be publicly disclosed. You can't have meetings where the public is excluded. And so there are processes with regulations. The government will come up with draft regulations, and then they publish those in the Federal Register. And anyone can submit comments. The agency that put out the regulation has to review all the comments they receive, and then they can put out a final regulation after they explain how they considered the comments they received. So there's both how agencies behave in terms of publicizing the meetings they have with lobbyists and the input from lobbyists, and then uh, as I mentioned, you also have that campaign finances there's some degree of regulation that that a corporation has to report what it spends on lobbying. Lobbyists can't just give gifts or cash to politicians. It has to be reported, and lobbyists have to register. So the government try and, to a certain degree, make it a little fairer between the smaller groups and the larger groups. You can think to yourself whether that works or not. Okay, we're going to now the second part, and we started this, is explaining collective action, explaining the process, and so as you remember, the second principle of politics, politics demands collective action. That means you have to get people. It's not just you expressing yourself to the mirror. You have to get people to vote on it, or you have to get people to send letters. You have to coordinate. People have to be involved in some fashion or another and express the preferences that they have. People with common goals isn't enough unless they act on it. But there are problems in getting them. One problem is the prisoner's dilemma, or a dilemma, the collective action dilemma, that if you work hard to get a benefit that enhances the group as a whole, everyone shares in that benefit, not just you. So some people are tempted to say, go ahead, you do the work and I'll share in the benefit. That's free riding. And the examples that in the midterm that you had was, if it's a group project, you're all getting the same grade. Somebody might be inclined to do no work and just get the grade that everyone else does. That's a collective action problem, getting everyone to participate. So, showed you a video right now. If you go in and if you weren't in class, you could look at these videos here. You could see the links. Or if you look in, there was a British show that I got these links from. It was called, I believe, Golden Balls or Split or Share. You see, if you put that in a search, and it's pretty entertaining. It's the same thing also, I think I used also as one of your assignments. Here's an example of the prisoner's dilemma problem. This is just an illustration. This is for a protest. And if there's a protest, let's say, look at the column here of you show up. You're deciding what to do. And the idea is that if there's a protest and you show up, so this is the middle column. My cursor isn't really very visible. So you show up in the for the protest. You see that column there? And in the first row, if everyone shows up for this protest, there's a good chance for the policy that you are protesting about to change. And you face a low risk of arrest for the protest because there's so many people, you just blend in. On the other hand, going a little further in that column, further down, there we go, there's my cursor. You can see it a little bit. If no one shows up, so this is the next row, if no one shows up, there's essentially no chance of policy change. But on the other hand, you have a high risk of getting arrested. So if you look at those two, that's if you show up, it all depends on what happens with the others. So let's take a look at what happens if you don't show up. Okay, you stay home, you sit on the couch. If everyone shows up, so we're looking at the far right column. If everyone shows up, then you can see in the first row, there's a good chance of policy change, even if you don't show up, because there's a big group that's there. And therefore, you have no risk if you're sitting on your couch eating Doritos and watching YouTube videos. You have no risk of getting arrested, depending on your videos. Use some discretion. If no one shows up, so this is the next row, there's no chance of policy change, but there's also still no risk of getting arrested. So if you look at whether you should show up, so look at the first row. In the first row, everyone shows up row. For you, comparing the risks, the benefits to you of not showing up, far right column, versus showing up, you have no risk of getting arrested if you don't show up. And you have the same chance of the policy change. It all depends on if everyone else shows up. And likewise, if no one shows up, you have no risk of getting arrested if you don't show up, and a high risk of getting arrested if you do show up. So the point with this is there's rational reasons why people are free ride. There's rational reasons why they don't show up at protests or don't contribute to these common collective action solutions. And so the question is, how do you get people to do that? It's in everyone's interest if they do it. But for individuals, it can be rational not to do it. So how do we create incentives for people to participate? It might be getting everyone to be in a co-op or be in a union. And more people who are in a union, the better the chance that the union is going to be successful in its negotiations with the company and everyone gets higher wages. On the other hand, you have to pay union dues. You might have to show up for meetings or something like that. So it can be advantageous to you to free ride. Let other people pay union dues and you just sit home. Again, you're on your couch eating Doritos, and that they do all the hard work and then you get the higher wages if they succeed. So when do groups form? How do they overcome that problem with free riding? And I'll note it's a particularly difficult problem with large groups as opposed to small groups. We'll talk about small groups in a few minutes, but large groups, it's really hard because they're very anonymous. In the case of, let's say, a protest, if it's all the people, parents in the Santa Barbara County or the Santa Barbara Union School District that want to protest regarding, it might be right now, let's do this actually. It might be they want to protest associated with, I don't know, educational content or teacher wages. But most parents don't know each other across the school district. So if somebody chooses not to participate, no one else really knows. In a big group, you're not going to know if somebody shows up to participate. So it's easy to sort of hide. It's easy for people to not know, and therefore they can't hold someone accountable. So what do groups do? And the answer is there's really kind of four ways that large groups solve this problem to overcome the free rider problem. And that's called selective benefits. They use selective benefits as a tool to get people. And that means selective are those directed benefits to individuals. And there's four categories that we can talk about: material, informational, solidarity, and purposive. So the first one is for why joining an interest group or how do they get people to stay in is material benefits. Material benefits are goods and things of value. So it might be that they offer an insurance plan to members. The AAA club used to do that. It might be they give out tote bags like on NPR, or calendars or travel discounts, but there's some benefit that you get, a real tangible benefit. I have ARP here. This is the American Association for Retired People, and they offer some sorts of insurance and other benefits. Oh, this was from the book. The book has a table. So if you look in there, you'll see this, and it lists some different sorts of benefits for each of those categories. So the second one is informational benefits. And that includes healthcare advice, a newsletter, something that you might want to compare different insurance things, or there might be different phone plans or something like that. They used to offer maps in some of these groups, but they're offering information for members. So joining gets you this advantage. That's a material benefit of sorts. Another is what we call, oh, and here, voter guides. All these groups offer voter guides to members as well. Another is solidarity benefits. And this idea is that by joining groups, people join a group of, by participating in collective action, they join a group where people have similar values, similar concerns. You get friends, in short. And so people do some of these things really for the networking, really for the social aspects, that there's some sort of benefit from just being with other people with similar concerns, similar issues, who care about similar things. And that's a benefit for being in an interest group. And the last are the actual benefits of the what you're seeking, the meetings, the to produce or enable the outcomes that you care about and all the processes that go in. So you feel good when you meet with the senator or whoever it is, uh, because you think you're helping accomplish the goals that you care about. So those are four ways that these interest groups that are tied to larger groups who are involved, like abortion rights, for instance. That's the whole country. They do these sorts of things. They'll try and sell each of these to members or potential members as ways to attract them to participate. One other thing also is this just another concept is the idea of political entrepreneurs. And that is that starting a group, it often is before there's selective benefits, you need somebody or some individuals who will take the cost, who will bear the burden and do the work for a group as a whole. And so they might get selective benefits as being leaders. They feel good about their role in that way, but that for groups to form, this is the yeast to generate the bread. Small groups. Small groups have a different situation. In the case of small groups, there's repeated interaction. So it's not just, they're not anonymous. The example is the civil rights protests in the 1960s. A lot of it came out of these churches. And so they would know if people came to church, they would then march afterwards, for instance. People would know who was showing up and who wasn't showing up. People cared about their reputation in the communities. So you couldn't shirk in the same way. You couldn't free ride without other people knowing, and that's a cost. And so small groups are able to overcome this issue better than large groups. Small groups, people will know if you're not participating and they'll treat you accordingly. And we showed this video. I won't show it here now because we showed it in class, but this is they call it the repeated or the iterative prisoner's dilemma. And the incentives are different in the case of a one-shot prisoner's dilemma. In the regular prisoner's dilemma, you have two prisoners and they're deciding whether to inform on the other. And the people in charge, the wardens or the police rather, are giving incentives to the prisoners, saying you talk, you get away with certain things. You don't talk, you go to prison longer. And they offer these alternatives to the prisoners. But the key is with the prisoner's dilemma is they're not going to see each other after. It's a one-shot deal. In the repeated prisoner's dilemma, they're going to see each other all the time. And so they behave differently. So if you watch this, it'll give you some more information on that. And that's it. So hopefully, if you have any questions, let me know. Oops. And there we go. That's all, folks. We'll see if we can